Okay. Now there's a little story here. Of course, I had told you all last week that I wasn't going to be able to speak this week, and Michael graciously agreed to uh, hold do a, a discussion, and then our friend Blake Silverstein graciously got COVID, and just kidding. And oh, pray for Blake. I'm sorry, I forgot that. Pray, Blake and Jeremiah, his little boy, both came down with COVID. The cases seem to be fairly light. He may mention this, when he gets to speaking. But anyway, Blake was supposed to speak at the Church of God International in Tyler this weekend, and of course he couldn't. So he and I were talking, and he said, "Well, I could give a sermon, for our group," and so great. And then I asked Michael. I said, "Michael, would you like an extra week?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, give me an extra week to prepare." So the greatest blessing, as far as I'm concerned, in this is I get 2 weeks off. So uh, hopefully, Diane said, "Skip, you need to get 3 prepared," and I said, "Well, you know how I am. I'm a last minute guy." So anyway, I'll now. Oops, I put that in a little early, didn't I? Somewhere I've got Blake's name. I think I have to go back up here. Just a minute. Well, I'll get there eventually. I put all this.
Like, yeah, I appreciate it. The prayers are much appreciated. This is my third go through with COVID, and I was sitting thinking about it, and every single time I've contracted COVID, it's been from a church function, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think heck, if you're gonna get it, might as well get it being around brethren and not forsaking the assembling, together with each other, right? So, yeah, you can, and you're about to hand it over to me, right? So I'm
Yes,
about
sir.
to, sir?
I said, "Yes, sir. You got it."
All right, cool.
You just got to share your screen, Blake. There you go. Cool. You see it.
Oh. Forget you saw that. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Hey, howdy, y'all. Good to be with you. I was looking through the names as we were starting, and, as the people were coming in. You start a little bit like we do at Katy Christian Fellowship in Houston, Texas, which is we start around 11, not on 11 on the dot. But as people were coming in, I was thinking that I knew each and every one of you, as it were. I had at least talked with you and had at least conversed with you. So it's nice. It's good to be here with you. I dare say I love you all, which is, it's kind of weird. Not my love for you, but it's kind of strange. I still feel this kind of anxiety. I'm online with you, and I'm presenting. None of you are in the same room with me, yet there's this anxiousness I feel right now, even.
Well,
Which
just so you know, we're thankful that we're not in the same room with you.
Yeah, Skip. Yeah, fair enough. Definitely with COVID for sure, right? So, but we, it's kind of strange, right? And because it's not just here. I would definitely be anxious before I spoke at Tyler, and I don't know what that's about. You might say, well, you're giving a presentation. There's this idea that maybe people who give presentations and speak in public just naturally feel anxiety, right? There's this idea that people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of death. I read once, which I thought was pretty funny, but it's not even really that, because in those situations I could just read my notes, right? I could just read my notes, never look up. Maybe it would not be the best sermon or presentation, but hey, we would get through it. and I thought about it some more, and it's just the sermon is weird, y'all. The sermon format is kind of weird. Here, please hear me out here. See, we were conversing before, we were kind of fellowshipping online before I started to speak. You probably, when you go to services, you have this really, probably you get there, what, 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes early. And you probably fellowship with some of your buddies, hopefully. And, we're getting into some, hopefully, and I mean, I really get into some great conversations before Sabbath services. And usually it's focused around scripture. It's usually something about, something godly, let's say. I'm learning things, I'm offering things. There's this great richness of sharing back and forth. There's some announcements maybe. We have some beautiful songs, usually. Well, if Dwight Armstrong is being played, maybe not. I'll be joking, I'll be kidding around, so hopefully that's okay with you guys. Like Skip, I like to crack a few jokes, but anyway.
I thought we hate jokes. Don't we hate jokes on this?
Only when Skip makes attempts at being a comedian.
Yeah.
Only if they're really bad jokes, right? But nonetheless, we have this, hopefully we have some good music playing, right? And sometimes we have some music playing and people have some good voices in there. I dare say that I get goosebumps, I get moved, and everyone's asked to sit down. And we call up a man and he's going to speak to us for 30 to 45 minutes, maybe an hour. And sometimes we all collectively hope to hear those. We just look forward to those two little sweet words in conclusion. Now, maybe I'm being, hyperbolic here, and I'm being a little, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not too much, and I feel this way. And it might be falling on deaf ears because of this group. As you guys have already jumped in, which I love, please do that. It's an invitation right now to interrupt me. It won't be interrupting, you'll just be adding to. And so just jump in there and add a comment if you want. But, so this group has a lot of back and forth and dialoguing, but you don't normally, y'all. You have a sermon where someone gets up and again has a captive audience, and all the meanings of that phrase, for an hour sometimes. And that's unnatural is what I'm pointing at. In some ways, I don't think that's representative of what they were doing in the first century church. The apostolic era of the church was, and I don't see in the Old Testament any evidence that that's what they were doing either. There was ideas of some rituals, some ceremonies going on, some sacrifices, some scripture reading from the scrolls, but there wasn't a sermon. There was no sermonizing. And really, I looked through it, and maybe you guys can weigh in and tell me how I'm wrong here, but the first indication of a quote-unquote sermon, even as far as being identified in the scriptures, is the Sermon on the Mount, which I think about that, and I don't get this in. Jesus might have been speaking for.
Well, Blake.
Yes.
Got a question. What about the time when the Jews went back to Jerusalem? They started the sacrifice, and was it the Feast of Trumpets?
Nehemiah.
They read from the scripture virtually, well, certainly we have time on there until noon, and I'm speaking off the top of my head.
Sure.
And people wept, and Nehemiah, if it was Nehemiah, Ezra and Nehemiah said, "Don't weep, this is a time of joy," and the Levites went among the people to help them to understand what was being said. So yeah, I agree, but that's a little anomaly in what we see in the Old Testament, because I agree, normally you don't see a lot of any back and forth or sermonizing per se.
Yeah, I mean, because I was looking it up, and Nehemiah was brought up, by the way, Mark, as a kind of an exception. So very good.
Can we quantify the term sermonizing in the modern context? And there's a tornado. That's Sarah's mic. She's in a wind tunnel. Can we quantify the term? I guess when we say sermonizing, I guess maybe in our modern understanding, we're talking like a college lecture, like we're in a college lecture circuit. We're just sitting there listening to the professor talk to us while we take notes for an hour. Would that be a fair?
Well, no, even that falls short, Michael, because in one of those lectures, you could raise your hand and you could have a question answered, which is fine by me. So, I mean, I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, that's what I think of when I think of sermons, something akin to, yeah, a college professor, lecturing for an hour and a half, uninterrupted. But it's even worse than that. That's what I'm saying. Because if you were to, it would be an anathema if someone were to speak in a CAGWA, sermon, a United sermon, a CGI sermon in the middle of the sermon, right? If someone were to get up and say, "I disagree with you," like we're doing on, like kind of like right now what we're doing, people would freak out. I think their heads might explode. Some guys might, get up and walk out. I mean, so I think, yeah, sermon in the modern context is something I think we've inherited, by the way, from an organization that we don't typically like to claim, that we've received so much from. Is I think that the Catholics really put this into place, right? As far as a man will get up and you do not interrupt this person for an hour or however long. I mean, would we all agree about that? I mean, we're defining our terms here.
Historically, I think you're correct. I think the idea of being lectured to an audience actually began with, if I recall my Catholic upbringing, what was the Catholic Church was because you weren't allowed to even question. So that may be where the tradition got grafted into church services. Because I mean, I've been to some Baptist groups where the pastor's up there. He's a lot more animated than you would find in a Church of God, but he's up there doing the entire sermon for the hour that he's up there, and nobody raises their hand or asks any questions. So I'm wondering out loud, if anyone could correct me, that's fine, that I think that tradition of being a captive audience and not speaking while the person's giving the message might have come down from the Roman Catholic tradition.
What about the Sophists, the Greek philosophers, who were a big part of Greek society? They would go, some of them would go from town to town, just like our preachers. And when some of those converted to Christianity, they started using the same techniques.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I could see that, like these great orators, right? But see, even then, I think it's
can I say the Sermon on the Mount was only called the Sermon on the Mount about 1,000 years ago. Before that, it wasn't.
Thank you. Okay, well, good. See, even then, I think also you think of Peter, right on the day of Pentecost was the other one that was brought up for the first example of a sermon. But then what happens after he talks about all these things? What happens in the middle of it? They ask, well, then what should we do, right? I mean, in other words, they interrupted him because they felt like they could converse with him, right? There was this idea, is what I'm trying to say, where there was some back and forth. It wasn't as august, as someone just, standing up there and uninterrupted for an hour, and it's unnatural, is what I'm trying to say. It feels unnatural for me. Maybe that's where I'm getting some of the anxiety from. Was the whole point of this? And you're like, well, to what ends, Blake? Okay, fair enough. That's what we have. Love it or leave it, baby. Maybe that's what's going on. Well, I think it's at the cost of the community. When you have this kind of, let's say, structure that we've inherited, and we have all these, things where we can't really converse, it's at the cost of the community, which is what I want to talk about today. That, that we should be more mindful of some of our traditions and some of the things that we have adopted, because some of it is taxing the assembling together, and that's not a good thing. I'd like to highlight some things today to emphasize why we should have a heart for the community. That in some ways the importance of the community of believers is paramount to the individual. And, we can see many scriptures that go into talking about the community of believers. We see in Hebrews 10:24, a great scripture talking about, and let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together. Here we go. As some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. And all the more as you see the day approaching. Well, it's kind of difficult to do that if you're by yourself, eh? And it's a bit difficult to do that if someone has the preconceived notion that you can't, talk to them while they're speaking for an hour. So, again, I'd like to talk about some of the importance of community, some of the scriptures that get into it. And really, to start off, I'd like to talk about and unpack some of the credible threats to the community of believers, because there's some things that I think that we're not thinking about that have caused I'll call it a tax, taxing the community, kind of attacking the community, attacking the motivation to come together. But before I go any further, would anyone like to weigh in about the idea of this idea about the sermon being unnatural and the way that I presented it?
I think there's a time and a place. There is a place for the sermon for the people who like that format. I don't like that format. I like this format. I like the format where if because I learn a lot from you all. When you correct me or when you add to something that I've said, and I'll give you a perfect example. Last week, Mark brought up that a timeline might help, and I've been looking at the timeline, and what a great idea. It's suggestion, and I'm probably going to go back. I think Michael and I've been talking. I think I'm going to use that timeline and go back and hit a couple of spots where we were, we didn't know where we were. We didn't know who we were. Who were we talking about? When did this happen? And so on. And I think that timeline needs to be used more, especially as we're going through the non-writing prophets. And, Mark, if I haven't thanked you personally, I want to thank you right now for bringing that up and for, showing it to us. And it
doesn't happen, right? It doesn't happen if you're not to feel the need or the welcomed, criticism, right? You don't have that back and forth like you're pointing at.
You don't. Sarah, go ahead. Sarah's had her mic on for a bit. I don't know. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay. Well, you used the example of the day of Pentecost, and you forget it says, and they heard them speaking in their own tongue. So it wasn't just one person speaking. There were a group of people speaking, and they understood each one of them as they spoke in their own native tongue.
Great point. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. Yeah, exactly. More evidence to say that, even that sermon wasn't really a sermon in the way that we think about it.
Gene?
Yeah, I agree. I like this way of doing things lots better. I don't know that it can be done with a really large group, though, like at the feast or something like that. I guess the answer might be to break everybody up into small groups. But if you have a huge room full of people, I'm not sure that it could be done well.
Yeah, it gets a little unwieldy over 200. 200 apparently is a good number for for a congregation if you want to keep the community in mind. People have kind of done studies on this, but yeah, I mean, imagine a room of 1,000 people, or gosh, dare I bring up, some of the mega churches, it'd be pandemonium. Yeah, you'd have to rethink how we do things, which is fine. Tradition is not doctrine, but gosh, we really seem to think that if we don't have a sermon the way that we've always thought about it, we're not worshiping. We're not keeping the commandment of keeping the Sabbath day holy. But yeah, you'd have to rethink how you did large groups for sure.
Can
Anyone
I-
else?
Something you said, Blake, earlier, just slightly humorous, but you mentioned about having some anxiety before speaking before a group of God's people. And I can concur with that. I think for the most part, especially when speaking with, a group that, is part of a corporate entity, there's animosity and worry because, you go up to speak, and we have a tradition where the brethren are basically, listening to the teaching time, what they call the meat of the Sabbath, where they're going to be taught, and they're taking notes. And if you say anything that might be even slightly controversial, every jot and every tittle will come back at you with clarifications and people getting upset or demanding to know where it is you're getting this understanding from, because it doesn't follow what headquarters teaches. And that helps the anxiety department, as far as being a little nervous as far, speaking in front of a large group.
Yeah. I know. So by the way, for clarification, I like that. By the way, I like the kind of iron sharpening iron, but not in the way that most people do it. Right? They let you have it with both barrels. I think in a spirit of understanding that we are one body, and if the one part of the body was, let's say, damaged, we could call it, we would all attend to that part of the body for correction, because we're one body, not because that individual is wrong and terrible, and let's let them have it, right? And yeah, the anxiety, I think, is there's a couple other observations. I won't really get into it because I don't want to digress too much. It was just interesting, and it kind of spurred on this idea about, well, yeah, because it's weird, man, because we go up there, right? And I don't have any interaction. I don't know if I'm, I get the looks on the people's faces, which is sometimes bad because, who knows why they're scowling? Maybe they have gas. I mean, I don't know, right? But I mean, it's really a bad detection system if you're on or off. And also, I think it robs us of the ability to be spirit-filled and led, right? There's this idea that we're spirit-filled as a group when we come together. And there's even scriptures about this. Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians 5 about that, we come together as a temple. Together we come together as a temple, and that in some ways, and then when the Spirit indwells the group, that it does not necessarily indwell the individual. So anyways, there's all this weirdness that kind of, I think the sermon is just something we've held on to for comfort's sake, not necessarily because it's scriptural, was the whole point there. And it also taxes this idea of community, I think. I think it's a time and place for it. I think it's a 1-to-3 ratio, personally, guys. I think there should be one sermon for 3 interactions, 3 interactive services. And I think that maybe even the sermon could be rethought of in some ways, where we kind of do it where, I don't know, there's maybe some ideas behind how we even do the sermon. But I feel a lot less anxiety presenting for you folks because of this idea, again, that we're going to be kind of exploring together these ideas that I'm going to bring up. And I think that's much more comforting than, all right, now get up there, Mr. Silverstein, and you better not misstep for the next 35, 45 minutes. Otherwise, we'll give you a list, like you said, Michael, at the end of the message. But so some of the credible threats that we want to get into.
One of the things, and you may cover this, but the entire New Testament time, they had home churches, they had house churches. I mean, they're named. There's many of them that are named. Paul talks about, the church in so and so's house, or the church in so and so's house. So, most likely they were interactive, discussions back then.
Sure. I mean, you even had this example of, so there is Paul, right? Spoke at some lengths to the point where some poor guy fell asleep and fell out of the window and died. So there were probably some examples of people speaking uninterrupted for a long period of time, even in these house churches. But I don't think it was because they didn't feel like they could somehow comment or whatever. But yeah, absolutely, Skip. Great point. That yeah, there was house churches, and there was smaller groups where people again would probably have a scroll that they read from. Then I think they kind of talked about what they thought that might have meant. There might have been some. I'm sure there was some rebuking, but it was done in kindness and love. There was some speaking the truth in love to one another. So absolutely, yeah, Mark.
So I've got something that I'd like to mention. That is that to successfully do this, we all have to get over the idea that whoever's speaking is automatically right. We are not Paul. Paul had a claim on his apostleship that he was taught by Christ directly. I mean, there's face to face, that type of thing. You know what I'm talking about. He went out in the wilderness and he had a unique experience and so on and so forth. So by this, I'm not saying that the person who's speaking isn't right, but there has to be a humility and willingness to admit that you might not know everything, or a person might not know everything. I've often said, when I came to kind of understand this back in the 80s and the 90s, that if you were part of the larger church organization that we're familiar with, they had an answer for everything. I mean, if you go back into the 70s, they had a letter answering department, which seems normal. But I remember when I was at college that there was a series of letters. They were called the 900 letters, where they addressed a subject that was asked, and then it became, they printed it up. So you had a 900 series of letters that answered all kinds of questions that you wouldn't dream were questions, but they were. The point is that the speaker has to get over the fact that somebody's might question them. And this is another thing that I've said for years, and that is that the minister, if he was ever asked a question, he automatically went into his mind meld, delving into what the quote church said about this. And if he didn't know, he made up an answer because he had to be right. So the speaker has to get over being right, and the audience has to get over the fact that whoever's speaking up there is right on all things. It is a learning experience by all parties involved.
It's really great, and it kind of dovetails nicely into my first credible threat, which is that, man, in the West, we are extremely focused on individualism, where the Eastern folks were more collectivist. And I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong per se, but yeah, the idea that the man who gets up front is let's go and take it to the other level, is any better than you, right? Is automatically right, we could say by extension of that, is dangerous, can cause a cult of personality kind of mentality in the group, and can cause, for me, I think it threatens the spirit to be in, because you just said it, yeah, it's great. And they go into this mind meld or whatever, they go into this scripted response. There's no spirit there. There's no ability to react. There's no conversation going on with that person. There is just fear, and there's just being this almost this compulsion with being seen as right or correct, and we don't know. Should be our first inclination. We don't know, and let's try to figure it out together.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead, Joe. I've done a lot. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that culturally, we have created this scenario when when you look at the way we, once you move from the little two-room schoolhouses where lots of times you had one teacher and the older kids would help the younger kids, and the goal, like Blake said, was for everybody to learn together. And once we changed to the modern public school system, you put that one teacher up the front, and they are the source and fount of all knowledge for that group of kids who are sitting there, supposedly absorbing the knowledge and truth that that teacher has. And you're taught as children that you don't talk in school. You know, you have to raise your hand. You can't ask stupid questions. You know, most of the time you're instructed to just sit and listen. And while there is a place in the early, you know, when a child knows nothing, then that's not wrong that a teacher should be the one that that instructs the children. But then as you get older, and even, you know, getting into high school and whatever, they still maintain that sit and listen kind of concept. And then they add in the whole concept of grades and awards and scholarships and top marks and whatever. It pits the students against one another. So instead of fostering a community of learning where everybody desires to help everybody else understand, you start, you know, one kid wants to get the better grades than the other, so they, you know, there's no incentive to help the kids who don't understand it. I mean, even back, you know, not that long ago, at least in British universities, when you went to university, you went to read history or read literature or whatever it was. And it was very much an interactive thing where the professor was really the facilitator of the discussion between the students. And, you know, once people here realized that they could, that there was an element of control that lay in the hands of the professor, that if you could be told to sit there and just, you know, as Mr. Armstrong used to have the old pictures, you know, with the funnel in the head, then there's a power structure that comes into play when a teacher realizes that they can control what goes into the student's head. And when you discourage that discussion, then then there's less likelihood of people questioning. And, you know, and of course we come from a church history where that bled over into our church history to where whoever was up the front was the authority. And you were actively discouraged from discussing between yourselves in case you should disrupt whatever the truth, in quotes, that was given from the podium. And so we've lost that art of discussion and debate and group learning, you know. And I listen to a lot of Jordan Peterson, and one of the things he says is we think by talking, and you often find that as you speak, you refine your thoughts, and when somebody else gets to join in and speak, then that affects what you think as well, and you have this discussion. And, you know, and so when it comes to size, I'm part of a book club that has 12 people, and it was mentioned last month that when a few of the gals weren't there and the group was smaller, that somebody said, well, they were told by somebody else in the book club that the ideal size for a book club was 4 or 5 people. And I kind of thought about that, and I realized that when we have 12, there is an opportunity for each individual to comment on what they thought about the book, how they liked it, whatever it was. But given the time constraints with 12 people, you know, there for an hour and a half or so, there's very much a limit as to as to what can actually be discussed and the depth at which you can go into the discussion, because there are simply too many people who each need to be given the opportunity to make a comment. And so the discussion stays at a very shallow level, which I find at times very frustrating depending on the book, because there are sometimes aspects that I would really like to, have more discussion about. But it makes me realize that, when the home church concept, where the size of the home basically limits the size of the group, there's a positive to that, because it gives more opportunity for a smaller group of people to have a discussion. So those are just some of the thoughts that I've had. Sorry to go on so long.
No. And get out of my notes, because yeah, that's exactly kind of the direction I'm heading.
I wanted to mention that there's
Yeah.
about, in the New Testament, there's about, I don't know, I think 17, but maybe there's more specific places where it says love one another. There isn't anywhere where it says listen to listen to sermons, listen to monologue sermons, and listening to monologue sermons sort of interferes with interacting with one another. That one another term you hear.
Sure,
I'd like to throw something in now from my personal experience. We've had this home fellowship since about 2005, and it has changed many times. And the way it is now, I think, is just absolutely wonderful. But for a long time, I was rather intimidated, because I knew that my entire audience knew as much or more than I knew about the scriptures, and that made me uncomfortable. Well, now it makes me very comfortable, because I know if I say something that somebody has a different or a better idea about what that scripture may mean than I do, I think it's wonderful that they come in and say, well, Skip, there's another, I don't agree with you. There's another thing in it. So I'm not the least bit intimidated at all now, but I've had to learn that because, for a while, I mean, we got people in here that've been to college for, studying the Bible. I hadn't been to college. I've been to the Ron Dart School, I guess you could say, but anyway, I think I'm going to say the same thing about right now, this little analogy. I tell people that I'm the second best salmon cooker, griller in the world. And, they look at me kind of funny and they say, well, who's the best? And I say, I don't know. I just assume that there's got to be somebody out there that's better. And I feel the same way about this home fellowship. I think we're the second best home fellowship of all home fellowships, and there may be one better. And I'm sure there are several equal, but this has been the best thing I've ever been involved in. And it's because of you all. So anyway,
Skip, I'm not gonna stand here and let you poor mouth this group. I'm not gonna stand for it. Second best, no. No, I think I think so much about this. This is great because you learned this. You said you learned. I would say that's humility, right? I might not be right, and you kind of developed a taste for being corrected. If I'm hearing you right. Because you realized there wasn't any threat, that it actually was an opportunity to learn and to grow. And that's kind of that's why I kind of put this whole message together, honestly, was because of that concept that we are losing out on some of that valuable learning back and forth through, well, Jill really hit it on the head because it was from Jordan Peterson that said, intelligence is dialogical. Well, what in the world does that mean? I thought about that for like a week straight, and I thought, well, what is, so he unpacks it. He says, look, when you have a conversation with someone, there's something going on there when you're interacting and you're both trying to improve each other. You say something and someone says, well, that's not completely correct. There's like 3 things you said that were really great, and there's one that's stupid beyond all belief. And because we have such a great interaction and such a great relationship, I can tell you that. And then you learn something. And so he's saying that intelligence, that knowledge grows in dialogue. Well, you can't have a dialogue, folks, if you're by yourself. You can't have a dialogue if there's someone up in front of you that won't be interrupted or can't be interrupted for an hour and a half straight or whatever. So, so that's where it's like, so I started to look at the scriptures, and I started to see, well, where does this all come from? Is this actually, valuable? Is this something that we've just kind of come up on our own? Well, yeah, from all indications, we've really had a lot of conditioning to focus on the individual, right? So that we have this Western individualism that is just really prominent. And it comes about from a lot of different sources. You can read up on it. I've done a little bit of studying on it. I've given some messages on, Western individualism versus Eastern collectivism. And I'm sorry, folks, but the book that you have in your hand, or the Bible, was written by Easterners, folks that were just they were Eastern, folks. They're people that have strong collectivist values. It's just where they came from. And now, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm just saying they're different, okay? That we as Western...
Would a better term be cultural rather than collectivist? I know what you're saying. I mean, usually collectivism, you associate that with communism. But
I get a little triggered when I say that word too, Michael. So when I say collectivist, I mean there was a strong emphasis on the community over the... Yeah,
the reason I'm asking is, as far as cultural, Prasad's here with us. And the Indian is very Eastern, and the way they learn and the way they do things is very different than the way that we do it here in the left, but in the West. But they do everything, together as, again, as a group together. And that's the mindset. They learn by dance. They learn by music, which is very different than the way we learn, which is, getting a lecture. So would it be better to say a cultural rather than collectivist? I know what you mean. It's just, there's baggage just with that term.
Well, it's kind of
I want to try to one up Michael. And actually, I think it's right. Tribal.
Okay. Ooh.
The cultural is tribal.
Yeah, I like that a lot, James.
It's family. It is a tribal structure, even more than the 12 tribes of Israel. There were sub-tribes, i.e. families.
Yeah, tribal is great.
I think it's very tribal.
Yeah, and you even have Jesus, which talks of, he said, they said, I can't remember the occasion, but they come in and they talk about his mother and his brother, and he holds his hands out, right? He said, here's my mother, here's my brother, right? In other words, his tribe, right? That some ways that the tribe was paramount to the family, which was really controversial at that time because of blood bonds and blood ties. And anyways, so we could, all right, just so you know, guys, we could probably go towards a Western versus Eastern conversation for the next hour and a half. I promise you, right? So, it's a very fascinating idea. And one of the points that I just want to pull out is that we're talking about the credible threats to the community here. And one of the things that threatens the community is focusing too much on the individual. And we have been conditioned here in the United States in particular through property rights, through having rights, period, right? That, having the judicial system that we have is all about the individual. It's not bad. It's just it's all these factors that constantly are having us here in America focus on me as opposed to we. Okay, and that is that can go as far back as I'm going to take it back as far as during the Great Awakening. Now, clearly, it was during the Great Renaissance that we had all these great ideas about what it was to be more focused on the reducing things to the smallest part and then exploiting that. But I'm not going to go that far. I'm just going to say, hey, look, there was this thing that happened. There used to only be a couple games in town, okay? There used to be only a couple different churches, a handful that you could attend. And more times than not, you were baptized into the faith, okay? As a very small child, you didn't have a choice. You were just you were just kind of given by that community. You were just dropped into that community, whether it be Catholics or Protestants, the Anglican Church. There's a lot of different things, or there's not a lot. There's a couple different groups that you would have just been kind of born into. That has not been the case progressively, right? Since then, we have splintered, we have caused more divisions, we have now churches for any kind of peculiarity that you feel. You don't like a green hymnal? Well, hey, guess what? We got a purple hymnal over here. Come on over. You know, we will split over the most ridiculous things. And that's unfortunate because, you know, when you're baptized into the faith as a little child, I know there's some issues with that. I know there's some problems with that. But let's talk about how it's kind of good, because you would have a little child that was being more or less collectively raised in a group of people who had shared values, more or less, right? We might have had a couple different things that we disagreed upon, but for the most part, we were all there together and we all had the same kind of ideas and concepts about our faith. You would even be able to, we have this term, you know, it takes a village, right? You know, that would have this helpful community to raise your child. You know, in our church, if a couple children are getting unruly, I have, you know, not only the go ahead, you know, the approval to correct and rebuke these little children, you know, out of love, but also the expectation almost. You know, the parent might say, well, you know, why didn't you tell them to slow down or to hush up, right? So, you know, our church is a little different than most churches, right? But we have that aspect in the church. If you're born into the faith, if you're baptized into the faith, they call them children of the covenant. Well, you know, the Great Awakening in the 1740s caused people to start to distrust the church. There started to become some splinters. Think of Martin Luther and his, you know, his statements that he tacked to the Catholic Church, right? There was this division that started to take place, and it's only gotten worse. And what does that mean? Well, it means that people now, when they just feel a little bit irritated with one another, or this church, well, this church just isn't fulfilling my needs, I'm going to pack up my Bible and my things, and I'm going to go over to that other church. You know, they throw in the towel at the drop of a hat. And I think that's a problem. It causes division. We're talking about credible threats to the community here. And so, you know, you have what? Good grief. I think it was something ridiculous like 15 or 20,000 different denominations of Christianity. It was something insane. And my dad's joke was pretty funny. He said, you know, Christianity is like eating ice cream. I said, like eating ice cream, Dad? He said, yeah, you know, there's a lot of different flavors. You just got to avoid the fruits and the nuts, you know, and he was right. You know, there's just all these little different groups out there that it's crazy. And with all that splintering, I have no problem with a small flock. And, you know, Jill talked about the advantages of a small group. That's not the problem here. What I'm talking about is the division and the motivation to get up and move, you know, at the slightest inconvenience. You know, you have these examples from Paul, you know, parting ways with, I think it was Mark, right? And we have Paul, you know, also with a little bit with Peter, right? I think even Barnabas, right? And come to think about it, I think Paul might have had a touch of the mercurial, but they didn't disfellowship one another, right? They didn't mark each other. They were still brothers in the faith. You know, in other words, what I'm saying is it's okay to disagree with people and still attend the same group. We feel this compulsion to split over the most ridiculous things, I think. So anything anyone wants to say about that? You know, I think that comes from, again, kind of the idea of just the church splitting over the last, gosh, what?
Well, Blake, they did not attend the same group. The contention between Paul and Barnabas was so great that they could not go on the trip together. And it was over an individual and his choices.
Okay.
It was not about doctrine. It was about an individual. And it doesn't matter if it's doctrine anyway. The point is that there was great contention and they couldn't even go on a trip together. Paul, you know, in a congregation rebuked Peter to the face because he was wrong about a doctrine. And this is this is the so-called rock that the Catholic Church points out, that everything was built on Peter. And Paul rebuked him to his face in a congregation. Now, am I suggesting that that's the type of behavior that we always engage or just feel free to engage in? No, I'm not suggesting that at all. But I am suggesting that everybody didn't necessarily get along. I think you were right. Paul was kind of mercurial. I think he might have been kind of hard to get along with, but he had some on a personal basis, perhaps. I don't know, but he, if you want to look at it this way, he didn't stay in one place very long. He went place to place to place. Now, he said it was because he had a mission. I'm not doubting that. I'm not saying he didn't have a mission. He did have a mission. He was motivated by a mission. But the truth of the matter is that he didn't. The longest record of Paul staying in one place was what, Ephesus? He stayed there for 1.5 years.
Yeah.
2 years.
Huh.
Wasn't very long. It wasn't very long. Now, so I'm not. I just throw that into the mix. And another couple of things, the Bible shows, the Scripture shows that in the Torah there is strong property rights and strong individual rights. You know, if somebody killed somebody and you didn't have, what, 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses, he was not punished for that. So just some things to think about.
About that too. Yeah, the witness, the idea of witnessing, by the way, is a very fascinating concept, Mark. There is all throughout Scripture this real emphasis on witnessing, which is kind of strange. 2 or 3 are gathered in my name. I think there's an idea of witnessing there. Anyways, we could go on a tangent there, but thank you for bringing that up, because I think you're right that maybe there was a bit of a cautionary tale between Barnabas and maybe Paul. Now I'm thinking about it again. Yeah, there maybe was something. Hey, look, this was not a good thing per se. I would say that there was still the understanding that they were a part of the same faith. And what my point was that there's been divisions to put people out of the group, right? Where I don't think that was what was going on. I think they had the wisdom to say, hey, look, we're going to part ways, but we're still believers in Jesus Christ. Maybe.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. There's been lots of separations take place because an individual said, wait a minute, what about that? And they said, well, no, the minister said this, or no, that's what we say. And, my personal perspective is that when a congregation, typically it's on a website now, when a congregation or a group lists their doctrines, they've automatically set up barriers. Because what if you come to understand something differently? How do you change? How do you change that? You got a list of, these are the doctrines that we have sealed in stone, and we can't examine those things. So anybody who comes up and says at whatever time and says, well, wait a minute, have we thought about this, that, or the other with regard to that doctrine? No, you can't talk about it because it's listed on their list of doctrines. Yeah, I think it's something that you have to be really careful about.
Back to Paul and Barnabas, they got back together. Paul said, Barnabas is the only one that's here with me.
That's right. They also said that bring Mark. Paul later on said, bring Mark, because he is very useful for my ministry.
Get the band back together.
Hey, Robert, your mic was on for a while back then. Did you have a comment?
Just something similar to what was just said. In those cases of division, they weren't saying the brothers are like a false teacher. They was just more or less they're not getting along, or they might have been arguing for a time over a point of doctrine, but they weren't saying they're a false teacher. It's like with Paul and Peter, it said, hey, you're kind of off the tracks on this one when it came down to acting like a Jew when the brethren came from Jerusalem. So it was something temporary, not a permanent division.
Yeah, it's really good, Robert. I think that's, what was going on there. It's kind of funny because he was actually threatening the community of believers, right, by trying to be playing favorites, right, not associating with Gentiles, right, and that public rebuking. Michael, were you going to say something?
I was going to say, yeah, Gene also had a comment. Here's Michael. I'm kind of watching who has their hand raised because we have these conversations going on. Gene, you had a comment?
Oh, no, it was just something off the wall that I thought of, but it would have led in the wrong direction. So thanks.
Okay. Well, the only thing I would say on my own is that, I don't think you were taking the Great Awakening to the woodshed, Blake, but I'm not sure your onus on where the divisions and splits came from was not fostered by the Great Awakening, as far as solidifying individualism and private property rights as the casus belli for how the divisions in the church begin to spread. Again, because there were contentions between denominations even at the time of the Great Awakening. But I think the crux of the issue of division that we're talking about happens where the people or the ministers or the organization gets a mindset, well, these people are of Satan and they're false teachers, false doctrines, therefore they'd have to be disfellowshipped, don't have anything to do with them. And of course, taking some of the New Testament letters out of context to use that as a blueprint to say, okay, we are the one true church and they are apostate. And once you get into that, we're no longer one body. Now it's like we're the only ones. And then you get that cultic mindset, which requires the hierarchy that Jill was talking about, where everybody has to be lectured to because everyone cannot deviate in thought about anything because everything's going to be told to you from the top down, which is where collectivism usually always ends up. So that's not God's way.
No, but yeah, no, and yeah, it was a contributing factor, I think, to continuing to motivate individualism, right? This kind of focus on the primacy of the individual, and yeah, so we don't. Rondar used to say, we only seem to be in the middle of the road when we're going from one ditch into the other, so I think there was a balancing act that we can see exemplified by the ancient community of what it looks like to have an emphasis on let's say accountability for the individual without degrading or the diminution of the community of believers, because it is difficult. How do we have a structure where we can question things that are unscriptural, that aren't good? We don't let everything go, right? But there is this idea that we'll get into it a little later, and there'll be an opportunity for me to delve into this because I think it's valuable to say, okay, yeah, there's some limits to when does the emphasis on the community go too far would be the question, if we're having this conversation, and we'll have that conversation here in a little bit. But so yeah, Western individualism is a credible threat to the community of believers. Technology is another one that has caused a tax on the community. It's incredible. We have these beautiful little devices in our hands. You might have one in your hand right now. You're in front of one for sure. All these great computers that have caused us to become the ability to be more connected than we've ever been in all of humanity's history. Yet we seem more disconnected than ever before. When you're in front of people, it's bizarre. I think it was Barna who just did a study that in 2021, over half the world's population has smartphones. And of those people, 64% suffer from what's called nomophobia. It's not a technical term, but it's something that is, is kind of jargon in the industry for the fear of being without your device, or if you have your device, of not being not having connectivity to the internet. There's people who actually get anxious, not only anxious, but to a clinical level, right? 64% of half the world's population. I don't even know what the number of that is, but that's insane, y'all. That this the technology, as much as it's been very helpful, look, we're connected together from disparate parts of the United States. Wonderful, that's great, but it does have some issues with it, right? And one of the issues was, I saw this study about there's what is it? So the amount of people who consider it to be rude to check their phone while having a conversation with someone in person has gone down. In other words, there's people find it to be okay and more socially acceptable to check your phone while you're having a conversation with someone. I guilty as charged. I've done it. And I thought about it as I was doing it, and then I felt, well, I had to justify myself. I had to say, well, I'm, my father-in-law, he's got cancer, and I'm worried about him. Yeah, right. There's just, again, attacks to the community of believers. All those little things add up to a big picture. All the times you check your phone while you're having a conversation with someone, it damages the body, y'all. And streaming services is great. It's wonderful. It's really helped out people who can't physically come to church and services, right? They're in a bad way physically. They can't get out there to go down to be a part of the body of believers and to worship together. Fair enough, that's great. But you know what? I think there's a significant portion of the population who use streaming services as a way to just say, you know what? Maybe I didn't get enough sleep last night. I didn't have the best night's sleep. I got a little bit of a stomach ache or whatever. And so I'll just use the streaming services. That's fine. I'll kick my feet up on the coffee table, stay in my onesie. And that's unfortunate, that we should have a little bit more wherewithal to get down to the church. What we're doing here, by the way, is not streaming in my estimation. What we're doing right now is something different, because we're interacting. I'm talking about people who lurk in the background and watch something happen, down at the local church. Yes.
The one thing that we make really, really clear to people who join into our online home fellowship is it is not to take the place of gathering together with other Christians. It's for people who, for whatever reason, don't have a place to go, can't go, too far, sick. This is not to take the place of regular church. And we've got 2 or 3 people who come on here for about an hour, and then they leave and they go to church. And I think that's it's the perfect thing as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if somebody's on here that could have gone to church, but that's not what this is for.
Sure. And
what about COVID? I mean, we're sometimes urged to stay home. And matter of fact, they in some areas they've closed churches.
I was going to bring it up. I know I was going to go to COVID too. Yeah, absolutely. It was a great tool during COVID for sure. Or whatever pandemic, whatever thing, that besets us, whether it be, some kind of, virus, right? That we use this as a tool. But here's the thing. Now that COVID has died back down, no one came back. There was a study by Pew that said, look, of the people that came back, or other people that left because of COVID, only 34% of them came back to services. It's almost like they went home and they saw how much more convenient it was, and they never came back. Now I know COVID's kind of kicked back up a little bit, but it's not nearly as bad as it has been. But there's a lot of people who I think are, let's go ahead and take those people and put them aside. I think there's a lot of people who are using streaming because it's so convenient, and they don't see the cost. They don't see that they're missed. They don't see that they, them being down in front of one another, like the reasons we've just talked about. It's a great, the community of believers suffers from it.
Well, I guess in my case, I'm speaking about myself, and I'm not mentioning this just to try to, inflate the egos of everybody in the group here. But in my particular case, and there might be a couple others on here that are in the same boat, there is a local congregation I could go to. out here in Paducah. I'm not welcome there. I don't feel welcome there. There, for a number of reasons. Not that we have differences doctrinally. We have differences in terms of what the congregation wants in terms of their worship service. For example, their local congregation is dead set against my even speaking about, the India ministry that I'm part of. They don't want to hear it. They don't want me talking about it. And I'm passionate about those things, and they're very much of a very corporate mindset. They just want to sit, want a seat, hear a message, or hear an audio tape, a cassette tape, or a video, and then go home right after service, and that's okay for them. I consider them part of the body of Christ, but that kind of worship service just isn't for me. As I told Skip, we've been spoiled by this particular format, even though we're connected via electronic devices. The fact that we can interact with one another, we can hear the word expounded upon, and then talk about it with one another and sharpen iron that way, has been exceedingly more beneficial to me personally in my own spiritual growth. I've learned more in the past few years being here in this home fellowship than 2 decades sitting and warming a seat in the corporate church. And that's just me, myself, and I. That's my comment on that. I don't know if that helps or hurts. Yeah, Joe.
No, I think that, so yeah, just to be clear, what's going on right here is a bit of an anomaly right now online, okay? And you don't usually have something like this going on where conducting services online in this capacity with these kind of, kind of slap you guys in the back here. You guys are doing a wonderful job of modeling what is available using these kind of, Zoom type church, because we might have to use this more often moving forward from any number of reasons, not a pandemic even, just from who knows what the future holds. And I will say this though, there are some things that are left wanting from this kind of interaction. You can't hug a computer screen. You can't, there is something that I think you have to really generate yourself to be connected using this medium, but it does work. A lot of times people will lurk and not necessarily jump in the fray. And there is, something to be said that I think a lot of people are just trying to be polite and not, crowding out the space. Oh, I don't want to bring that point up. I think it might just distract or whatever, which is, hey, don't do that. I'll tell you right now, the weirder, the better. Jump in there. We I know these groups go for a while, and if I don't get through my whole message, I think that's better, that we're all interacting than not. Yes, Gene.
Go ahead, let Jill go first.
So, well, I was just going to say, I totally agree with this, but the alternative to this is not necessarily a big group of 100 people. You don't have the fellowship. The physical fellowship is really necessary and is wonderful, but it doesn't have to be an organized church congregation. Really, you just need the opportunity to have actual physical interaction with people, even if you you watch a short video together and then you sit and you just talk about it. That, like you said, the hugging and the eye contact and the give and take, you can satisfy that aspect of things even if there's just 2 or 3 of you that get together in person. So just because you're removed from a church service, like, there's nothing here close to us, it'd be 100 miles for us to go and gather with, even 20 people. But yeah, to make that effort, even if you can, just because I find that, like I said, I listen to Jordan Peterson stuff, and oftentimes after I've watched something, I just wish I had 2 or 3 other people that we could sit down and just discuss what we got from that and the things that were meaningful. So, I think sometimes we probably might need to make an effort just to get together and have those discussions.
Okay, so next Tuesday night, we're going to start an online discussion of Jordan Peterson. Jill, you're in charge.
Gene.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to what you're saying there with more people only doing the electronic or online interaction, more people suffer from depression now than they used to. And some of the ways, some of the helpful things they talk about, lessening your depression is socializing, face-to-face socializing. Another thing is just getting outside, getting some sunlight in your eyes. There's actually a chemical that's created, I think by, right at your retina. When sunlight hits it, that helps lessen depression. And then the other one is exercise. Just, getting up and moving around lessens depression, which if you're sitting at a computer screen all day, you're not really getting a lot of that.
Yeah, there's reason. What I would assert is there's reasons we're probably not considering that it's beneficial to meet with other people, right? And I'm trying to highlight, I'm trying to shine a light, you guys are as well, about some of the benefits that come with that maybe we're not completely aware of. And I've been really spoiled. Okay, I have a great group. I mean, Jill, what if you did have a community of believers that we come together on the Sabbath and there was this rich interaction, and there's just been this, I mean, CGI Tyler is so awesome, y'all. There's just this love present. There's this a community of people who actually are, looking for what's going on in each other's life. There's a curiosity about conversations that we have, and the church has been growing because of it. And when I'm giving this message for them, I really want to say, hey, look, the growth we've seen is not because we've had the right doctrines, okay? And I'm going to assert, anyways, there's a love that's present when these people come together that are only 10 minutes away from my house, that I just adore. And it's only about 50 people, but we have this great group. I don't want to brag, but it's been awesome. And it's one of the reasons why I decided to move to Tyler, was that we had this awesome group. And from the moment we walked in the door, there was no third degree, right? It's quite the opposite. It was like, hey, who are you? What's your story? What's going on? There was this leaning in whenever we were talking about not being judgmental. There's this great quote from Walt Whitman, I think it was attributed to, says, be curious, not judgmental. And I thought that's great, because that's what was going on there, was these people were very curious about what's happening. And that's what it looks like on the field, is curiosity. I think when you're having a conversation with people, being there's a sense of wonder-filled conversation. It's wonderful, right? It's full of wonder, and you can take the case you don't know people. Jordan Peterson says this wonderful thing about, look, if you're bored in a conversation, they're not boring, you're boring. Meaning that, people tell you the most incredible things if you're actually listening in the right way. If you're listening with a curious mindset, the most wonderful things come about. Now, there's one more credible threat that I want to bring up, and per my suspicion, I knew we were going to really I wasn't going to be able to get through the whole message possibly, but I'm going to keep going. So you guys tell me, when to throw in the towel, as it were. But the last credible threat is just the obvious, which is there is a war on Christianity, y'all. This. We're talking about the taxation of the community, especially with young people. Man, they're being bombarded with reasons why they should not meet with other fellow Christians, or that the Christian conversation, as I call it, is not one that's credible. So there's been an overt attack from the enemy to say, look, what that church stands for is malarkey. And the chief critique from people who do not, young people who do not attend Christian services is that of perceived hypocrisy, is what I could summarize it to. That young people think that the people who meet down at the church are a bunch of hypocrites. And by the way, the only proper response to "you're a hypocrite" is yes, and help me. Point out where you think I'm a hypocrite. Let's look at that together. And that's not been the collective response that I've found in the church to "you're a hypocrite." It's usually to justify, to prove the other person wrong, that no, we're not hypocrites, and la 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 la, right? And down and off we go. But that, yeah, the last credible threat I want to bring up is that there is this idea that, look, the media, the enemy, the left, all of it, are just, they do not like the Christian community. And so let's get into the first scripture. I brought up a couple, we brought up a couple, but let's go to why the community of believers is important. What are some things that the community provides? We've already touched on a couple of them, but let's listen to, let's go to Paul talking to the church at Ephesus. I think, yeah, there we go. And chapter 4, and if you've had the privilege of going through a skip study on the book of Ephesians, you know that this was a circular letter. It wasn't necessarily to the church at Ephesus, but kind of the groups that are around Ephesus. But let's, but there is some advice being given to the community of believers there in Ephesus that I think does kind of match our community. Ephesus being a port city had a lot of, let's say, different ideas being brought in. There was different distractions with the Temple of Diana. There's lots of different, just a lot of worldly things going on in Ephesus. And so I think we have a lot of similarities in that regard. But this was some pretty pointed advice from Paul to the community, to the church, to the group of believers there. And he starts off saying, I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you, let's move this here so I can actually see, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. And I thought, well, first off, I don't think that we really understand what it is to be a prisoner. Or we have a really strange relationship with the understanding of what happened with slavery. Let's face it, y'all, we don't know what it is to be a prisoner, or to be, we don't even know of someone who is a prisoner. We don't even know what it is for someone to be a master, to own a slave. And so that's kind of a phrase that is lost on us, is what I'm going to assert. That there are, I think the word there is doulos, which is, again, means a prisoner, a slave, if you will, that is wholly given. Paul's saying, hey, look, I am someone who is owned. My motivations, whatever they may be individually. Yeah, sorry, guys. Jeremiah wants to say hi. Say hi.
Hi.
All right. So.
Dad, we are going to pool, but then tell us when you come in.
I will. I know it's supposed to be done by now, but I'll be down there in a little bit. Sorry, guys. Okay, we'll have fun, and I'll be down there later. Close the door. Thank you. Sorry about that. So, we have this idea that he's wholly given by his master, who is his Lord, right? That his motivation. Yes.
Doulos, as you know, I've talked about doulos a lot. I think it's one of my favorite words. We are willing prisoners. We are willing slaves. It's like we're in prison, but we don't have, the door's not locked, and we don't have any chains on us. We can walk out anytime we want to, but we want to be here. We want to be slaves. I think that word doulos makes it very, very clear.
Sure. And what I always say is that we don't understand the full significance of that concept, Skip, because we were just so far removed from slavery, that we don't know how incredible that is, that you would willingly, thank you for bringing that up, but yeah, you would choose to be a slave to the Father. And then I thought about this idea of walking in a manner that's worthy of your calling. He's starting off this chapter by really digging into the individual, saying, look, each and every one of us has been called individually. Now, we all have our story. We all have what a miracle it is that we are, we're here, that we have been called. And I could assert that if we were to go through one at a time here, that each one of you could tell me the moment you knew that you were his, that you became his slave in the best way possible. That we each individually had that conversion moment. And that is well, it's incredible. It's miraculous. And I know for me, in thinking about it, it's just, it wasn't going to happen without him. You know, I was dead. I really was. I could see that the future before me, if I kept going on without that calling, was going to be devoid of love, devoid of him, devoid of just really of being a part of his family, and just the beauty of being a part of this just makes me, you know, emotional to think about what my life could be about without that calling. And says he's saying, like, look, now act like it, you know, walk in a manner worthy of that, that you appreciate that you kind of hold your head high, you kind of have your shoulders back, you know, and you say, you know, I've been called, I'm special, but that you do it with humility, and you do that with gentleness, you know, and that you do that by being patient as well with one another and bearing with one another in love. And you know, it's some translations have here that you are long suffering with one another, you know, that you are to be together with one another in love, but that you know, that you suffer with one another. And there was this when I read this, I thought about you know, Ron Dart gave this wonderful sermon about shared suffering, that in some ways that we're meant and we're built to suffer with one another. And it's one thing to be in pain, but it's another thing to be in pain and alone. And any of you that's ever been, you know, suffered tragedy, or just a life-altering, you know, pain, you know, and if you haven't, just wait. It's out there. It's coming. I promise you. Pain is no respecter of persons, and tragedy as well. And you better have a community of believers to surround you and to love on you and to hold your hand when you're in the waiting room, because it's so valuable to be together, right? To have that community that you can love one another and can kind of suffer with one another, and to say, you know, I don't have the words to offer except for, you know, this sucks, you know, excuse the expression, and I'm sorry, and I love you, and we're gonna get through this together. But that is, well, that doesn't happen if you're by yourself. You don't get that if you're not a part of a group, right? And you know, that's important. And that's one of the one of the things that Ron talks about is that you know, that shared suffering, man. You could say that that's what we're built for in some ways, that we are built to suffer with one another. He starts with this another phrase here. He says, now I want you to be eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. Man, I thought about this for a long time. This one phrase here, and I could give I did give a whole message on it, really, because this one phrase here is pretty important. He's saying, look, I want you to be mindful that the unity of the group is very important. And I want you to be almost borderline paranoid about disunity that enters the group. And he tells this to the people, right? To the individuals, that, you know, you need to be mindful whenever something enters the group that's going to cause division. And he hasn't brought up anything about something outside of the group. He's talking about me. He's talking about you. And let's face it, we all have the capacity to cause division, don't we? And it's like, and I thought about this for a while too, that, you know, sometimes you're on and sometimes we're off. Sometimes we're spurring one another on to good deeds, and we're, you know, loving one another, and we're down there helping the little old lady with her hot water heater, or, you know, what have you, and then we're all bent out of shape that they've run out of creamer, right? We're all upset about some little trivial thing, you know, and so, you know, we all are, you know, kind of this vacillating of remembering the importance. We're eager to maintain the unity, and then we get selfish with some weird personal pet peeve, right? And
Blake,
so, yeah, Jim.
I think that the last three words of this verse is the cure.
Yes.
You maintain unity by a bond of peace. In other words, if you and I can get along, then there's going to be a unity. It creates that. The bond creates unity.
Yeah, that that I think there's almost this idea that the piece is should be focused on, right? That whenever you feel a dis-ease, or not dis-ease, but that there's, because sometimes it's uncomfortable to be in a group and you shouldn't just jump on it, but that's the first indication that maybe something's off. And what I'm trying to draw a light to is that we are, this is advice for us individually, to be mindful of, because just because you're doing good at a lot of things by maintaining the peace doesn't mean you don't have the capacity to cause division. And I think we could all think about an occasion where we became selfish. And I thought about this other thing about that. There's this book written by C.S. Lewis called The Screwtape Letters. Man, what a piece of work there. It's probably one of the most entertaining books I've ever read, and also one of the scariest books for its accuracy. And there's this idea that C.S. Lewis unpacks in it, which is pretty cool. And just for those of you who haven't read the book, the premise is you have Screwtape, who is a general in Satan's army. Now, it sounds kind of grim, but it's interesting. So this is the general, one of the generals in Satan's army, who's giving advice. He's writing letters of advice, the Screwtape letters, to his nephew Wormwood, who is kind of a sergeant, and he's been tasked with seducing and kind of pulling away people away from God the Father, right? And when you have this advice, you read this advice of what they're trying to do, how they're how Satan is trying to pull us away from the path, the way, if you will. You kind of see how they're working. Again, it's fiction, but one of the things he brings up, he says, look, Wormwood, these patients, as they call us, the patient, are spiritually amphibious. I thought, what the heck does that mean? He said, they're part physical and they're part spiritual. In other words, we're these carnal beings, right? We're these physical carnal beings with spiritual aims, right? We have been aiming towards humility, gentleness, patience, bearing with one another, right? With peace. But we're physical. And so we'll forget that sometimes, and we'll go to the carnality, right? And he calls that the law of undulation. I love that. The law of undulation, where there's this oscillation from remembering who we are, we've been called, and then we forget, and we become very selfish, and we become very sinful. But that we have this vacillation back and forth. And he says, Wormwood, you've been attacking your patient when he's on. You've been attacking this guy whenever he's remembering. Wait for him to go and forget. Wait for him to do this, to do this selfish thing, then attack. Then we'll really pile on, because that's when you'll be more effective. And I thought, man, kind of a digression a little bit, but not really, because whenever he's saying for us to be eager to maintain, I want us individually to think about whenever we forget, whenever we get all ticked off that they've run out of creamer, right? To bring yourself back and say, that's selfish, that's silly. And I bring up a trivial example. Sometimes it's not so trivial, but all the same, that when we forget, y'all, it's important to come back, to be eager to maintain this unity because of the peace that we share. And it's with this understanding that we are one body, that we are one spirit, that we've all been called to the one hope that belongs to our call, that we have one Lord, we have one faith and one baptism. We all share this, right? We're all bonded together by this same kind of understanding. The same kind of promise has been given to us, that was by one God and Father of all, who is over all and is through all and in all. And I love that. There's that kind of, this really beautiful almost poetic language being used here about the ubiquity, the ever presence of God, the Father, who's everywhere, and in some ways is ineffable. He's beyond our grasp, but yet he's everything. It's just this kind of strange kind of paradox that, God who is everything, God the Father who is everything, yet we're together trying to strive towards something that cannot really be touched or felt. And then we all come together with this understanding that we are one body, and again, Paul uses this idea of the body of Christ that we find in 1 Corinthians 5, that we are all purchased individually, but we are together, one body. And the analogy of one body is, yes?
I was going to say, before you get to the last verse there, just a thought, kind of tie into the cleverness of our adversary, and you bring in Uncle Screwtape into this, because this would be his thinking, and this is how easily we all fell victim to this, those of us that had a past in the corporate church, is, you look at Ephesians 4, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Those were the verses that were often used to justify the necessity of the church creating what I call cookie cutter Christians, where you weren't allowed to have any diverse thought or understanding besides what the top-down hierarchy told you had to believe and think. And because they didn't have verse 7 as a prominent feature of what we needed to have. And so when you remove verse 7 and you focus on 3, 4, 5, and 6, you get into a situation where you create a cultish type of, everyone has to think exactly the way the leadership on the podium says, or else you're out. And then this could be used as a way to foment division among the body. And also it limits the thinking of who's part of the body. And I think that's something that, I was victim of. My focus on who was part of the body of Christ was limited to who was in the room with the guy in front of the podium. That nobody outside of that room or outside of that organization could possibly belong to the Father, because there was no grace. And so just my thoughts on that particular thing. Again, Satan's clever. He can use the scripture and twist it enough to make us think that we're doing God's will by saying, okay, we have to be unified in the spirit, in the bond of peace, which means everybody has to think and believe and be 100% on the same page with every single jot, tittle, doctrine, and prophecy. And anyone that is of a diverse thought, if you don't believe that a German Pope is going to lead Europe to conquer the world, then you're out of here and you're gone, because there was no grace involved. And
there's actually some more advice later on in this letter that we'll get to that actually is a corrective for what you're talking about, that they clearly left out as well. But grace being the key ingredient not to be focused on, right? And that it was a gift that none of us were deserving, right? So that being left out as well. Again, like you said, the homogeny of the group is not what we're talking about here. The homogeny is found inside of that we all have the same aim collectively, right? That we are all called individually, and we all have the same kind of mindset, and that we were all wretched. That's how we come together. We were all going to die, the real death, right? If it was not for Jesus Christ giving us this gift of grace, which was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. Now let's go ahead and I'm going to go pick it back up on 14, because there's a bit of a digression there. But I want to come to this advice here that says, so that we may no longer be children, right? So he kind of comes in, he breaks into this thought here, saying that we've never seen this, that we've never been tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. I think that would be something they would use to say, hey, look, look, we can't have anyone else have any divergent thoughts coming in here, right? Fair enough. Maybe that's what's going on. But he's saying to really be centered inside of what we know to be sound doctrine, and that to be mindful that there will be those out there, men individually, who have set out to divide the group. And there are people who want to be the person who's sitting in front of the group, who will be unquestioned, who will be considered right, like Mark brought up, no matter what. And so they set out to have a wedge issue brought up. They're scheming, right? And that he says, look, be paranoid, be looking out for this, be aware. You know, we have to know our scripture. We have to know what's written for admonition to be able to question these things. And that presupposes that we will bring it up, that we will say, hold on, I don't know about this idea, this doctrine, because he says, rather than just letting these people come in and run roughshod all over our group, I want you to speak to one another truth and love. Whew. I mean, there it is. There's the corrective, Michael, is to be in a group that you're paranoid about the peace, you're paranoid about the unity of peace, you're looking out for anyone coming in, bringing in some kind of weird doctrine, because we're constantly speaking to each other, saying in peace, which is by love, which I think is kind of this idea that you have the group in mind, you have the one body in mind, you're loving the group, and you say, look, I don't know about what you're talking about there, Jack. Doesn't seem to be too, it seems like it's going to split this group, and it seems like it's not very scriptural. Let's figure this thing out together. If you're actually, let's all come together and let's talk about this thing and really make sure that this is something that's fruitful and that it won't divide us, because that's what's important, that we don't divide. So I think that maybe that's the corrective as well, Michael, that we're constantly speaking to each other, truth and love. And there's this idea, the truth will set you free. But first, it's really going to upset you, that the truth spoken in love doesn't mean it's going to feel warm and fuzzy, right? It's like a conversation you're having with someone, and they're saying some stuff in the group, and you're like, hey, can I be honest with you? Which is like the quintessential loaded question. And people say, oh, well, were you not being honest with me up to this point? And that's not what people mean when they ask you that question, can I be honest with you? When they say, can I be honest with you? It's kind of this, hey, look, what I'm about to tell you might be difficult to hear, but it's because I love you that I'm going to bring it up. And you say something, like I said earlier, oh, look, man, you said these 4 things or these 3 things that were really great. I'm really happy how you're handling that. But man, you're doing these 2 things, in my estimation, really wrong. And let me offer you some things that I figure to be helpful. I'm not, because most people don't do that, do they? They kind of step over it. There's this opportunity to speak the truth in love presented, and they would rather eat bad meat than tell you how they really felt. They just let it kind of slide by. They step over it. They kind of let you kind of keep going down that pathway towards pain and destruction. But if we're one body, if we're all together, you see that person walking down towards damage or towards pain or suffering, and that is you walking down towards pain and damage. So you say, no, this isn't just me trying to correct them. This is me actually understanding that we are one body, that we've all been called together through one hope. We've all believed the calling, and him hurting is me hurting. So I'm going to go ahead and have the uncomfortable conversation with you because it serves all of us together. Because we're to grow up in every way into him who is the head. We all have the same aim. We are all pointing in the same direction. As the body comes together, right? We're all Christians. We're all aiming towards the same thing. And so we all are together trying to become more Christ-like. So even when we speak the truth in love, it's a painful thing. It's hurtful. It feels, uncomfortable. But it's because we're all pointing to the same direction, from whom the whole body, joined together, are held together by every joint with which it is equipped. We're all a bunch of joints. I know that word has a different connotation these days, probably been called worse, but yeah, we're all these little, pieces of the body, right? We're all kind of joined together, and we're all kind of working and undulating, right? Back and forth, but we all have the same aim. We're this community of believers, and hopefully we're struggling with one another, so that when each part is working properly, that it makes the body grow so that it builds itself up into more knowledge. So it builds itself up into more power and influence and donations. No. So that it builds itself up into love, up in love. You know, that love is the key. That when we're working the best together, when it's all working like a well-oiled machine, a well-oiled body, that the joints are all in unison, that we're all pointing in the right direction, that we're all there together, that what will we see as we grow? We'll see love. And I thought back on, you know, that's what I saw in that community of believers in Tyler CGI was love. There was all this love there. There was just this real keen working together, kind of being curious. You know, there was some truthful, you know, some truth being spoken in love that kind of felt painful, right? But it was all for the betterment. It was all to help each other to grow. And that's what I saw. And so, you know, that for me was the importance of the community, was this beautiful, you know, piece of advice here in Ephesians from Paul to the community of believers. Anyways, anything anyone would like to share about all those observations? They could be completely wrong. They could be, you know, problematic. You know, please point out the holes in the logic, and I would be happy to hear it. All right. Well,
I think that this shows the motivation. This shows what the result is from humility and the motivation of doing the right thing, which is love. And the point is that you can't work to this end when someone is not, or have the frame of mind of humility, because they're not open to change, which is what we all have to have. So,
thank you. Yeah, I trying to build a case for community is what really was going on here, and it really did stem from this idea that, you know, we come together, and because there's been some critiques about why the church isn't the right church, and it's got all these problems with it. And I'm like, well, hold on, man. There's something happening here that's really important that we shouldn't just so casually denigrate. And there may be for reasons that we haven't considered, and myself included. And so this was an attempt to kind of focus on why the body of believers is so important.
I think you made. Oh, sorry. You made an important point a while back about you know, going from one ditch to the other and very rarely managing to stay in the middle of the road. And you know, and I think when each of us got to a point where we realized that the whole corporate church group thing was not not the best or most effective way to develop faith and grow, and you know, and all that kind of thing, and that it became more of an indoctrination kind of thing. Our immediate tendency is to go from that to doing nothing kind of thing, or to staying home by ourselves. And you're bringing this up is that we need to work at finding something in the middle of the road, you know, with those smaller groups, that incorporates the fellowship, but leaves aside the corporate tyranny that we have experienced in the past, but that also prevents you from staying in your basement, you know, with your smartphone or whatever. Because, I mean, even looking at the people who are really kind of out there politically or socially or whatever are the people sitting by themselves in their basement with nobody kind of iron sharpening iron, nobody rubbing off the rough edges, and they just get more and more focused on their little pet peeves or whatever it is they're putting out there, and they just get more entrenched in their personal thinking. And you know, from that aspect alone, just contact with other people who are willing to say, hey, wait a minute, you're going off the deep end, you know. That's because we as humans just, we're built for relationships. I mean, that's the whole journey of life. And you know, so our connection with one another is part of our way of understanding how relationships work, and consequently understanding how we connect with God.
Yeah, that's so. Thank you. You articulated that beautifully, and I cringe when I hear people really talk so poorly about where they've come from. Now, this is coming from someone who did not experience it, so hear it for what it is. I think what a lot of people saw was where that was where the community, like we just said, where the community goes too far, or the emphasis on the community goes too far. We saw that. We saw because Herbert brought up a bunch of wonderful things, right? There was a lot of don't throw the baby out with the bathwater is what I think. You know, there's a lot of wonderful, great thing about that the Old Testament is still, I mean, nothing that he spoke about was unique to him, right? We can trace all of the ideas and the doctrines he presented to before him where he got these ideas. That's fine. He made them popular, though. He made them, he brought them to light. He brought them to a large swath of people. And then it became kind of calcified, like, right? He said this corporate church that was questionable and you know, in many ways toxic, we could say, right? Well, that was just showing us where that becomes a problem. Now we need to react, right? We need to go ahead and not, you know, like you said, go into our basements and, you know, into the ditch of just kind of isolating. That's not the answer. But it is, I think it stems from this idea that someone told me this once, which is tradition is not doctrine. And I thought that's so great. You know, that we got to be able to understand when we've become too dogmatic, and to know when to respond and to find out where the edges are and why are we coming together? Why is it important? What are the things that we cannot dispense with without losing the thing that we're all collectively aiming at, which is Christ? You know, so yeah, I wanted to I wanted to bring up this conversation, as squishy as it is. As someone called me once, you know, that I like to bring up psychological or nuanced ideas to the point where it becomes a little squishy. I don that title with pride, but hopefully you felt like it was a little bit grounded in Scripture, and there was some ideas that, look, the community of believers is valuable for maybe reasons that we're not considering, and hopefully that was heard here today.
It was. You know, one thing to keep in mind, though, bringing a little bit of Romans 8:28 into this, you know, you hear messages, and the one thing that brethren want to avoid is, you know, division, and we don't want to, you know, that's something we should avoid at all costs. So when you consider what happened with you know, a lot of big churches and corporate churches, or if you've gone through a split, I know Bernard's congregation has just gone through a nasty one. You know, you go through that period of introspection. Okay, why did this happen? Is it false doctrine? Is it people trying to get a following for themselves? And all the reasons, you know, maybe we were toxic, or maybe we were occultish, whatever the reason. Take some comfort in knowing that our Father's in charge. Christ is the head of the church, and that if the divisions are allowed, and they happen, you think to 70 AD, you cannot grow a crop if all the seeds stuck in one spot. And that if there is division, and if we're scattered, or if we're moved, or if you're moved, it's possible that, you know, you know, all things work together for good. And you know, because, you know, we can beat ourselves up saying, well, we've sinned, we fell short because there's division, and it's all our fault, it's my fault, and you get into this rut. But you know, I guess I'm trying to throw a positive spin on this, and that's that, you know, let go and let God, and then maybe He will move us to a place where, you know, He doesn't want us all stuck in one exact spot. That the body is global. It's not limited to an organization. It's not this group or just that group is the one true church. We're talking the body is a living organism. It's a living thing, and mankind tends to put our understanding of what the body of Christ is or the church is to a corporate group or this bunch over here, and it's much bigger than that. And so if we're moved, if there is some division, it's possible that he's scattering the seed so that a better crop can grow. Trying to throw some positivity there. Romans 8:28 there.
No, yeah, that was brought up too by another friend of mine as well. Because there was another conversation that took place that really kind of rubbed me the wrong way, which was and I won't say who it was with, but this conversation about how do we grow the church? How do we get our, and what it really was how do we manipulate, cajole, use schemes, right, to grow this group over other groups, like you're saying, right? It's not that. It's a community of believers across the globe. And when you start to focus on just our little group, now the person was, I'll give him this, that the person was really, they had good intentions, right? That they were trying to say, okay, how do we get this group to become bigger? And so there was some good intent there, I think, but there was this idea of how do we fill seats, And I thought, man, that's not how you do it.
That's not our role either. I mean, we plant and we water. Who gives the increase?
Yeah, that's right.
It's not up to us to grow it. We plant, we water, we teach, we do these things, but the increase is our Father's business or Jesus Christ, not ours. And I think that's where we also go wrong. So
sure. That should be liberating, right? That should be liberating. I thought, this is counterintuitive, but I think you love and let go. And what you do is you see. So we were looking at, I was like, so I promise you, the people that we've seen that have shown up, that have kept coming to the services, have been from the love they felt. They came here and they weren't ignored, or they weren't, kind of ostracized or questioned. They were asked questions about what's going on with them. They were felt like there was this pronounced love. And guess what? They show back up because they felt valued. And it wasn't a put on either. That was the other thing. It wasn't like, okay, well, now we got to go over and we got to act interested. No, it was authentic. And also it's okay to be a small flock. Like Jill was saying, Jesus talks about the small flock, there's this kind of this understanding that the world won't really see it. They won't know it, but the right ones will, and they will grow. They will show up. They will continue to attend, and you'll be the better for it. You don't want everyone. You want the right ones.
So size in some of this kind of thing matters. You can do a lot of things, get to know a lot of people in small groups. Sorry, let me start over. You can have a small congregation. I think you mentioned 50, 60 in your experience there, Blake, or whatever, but I'm kind of guessing at that. Yeah. But I would posit that within those 50 people, you have lots of small groups. That's just to illustrate the point that, Tom Jones, who comes in, who's been a member of that congregation and is been there for 15 years, is going to be close to a number of other people that, for whatever reason, he associates with, and they're going to be interacting with each other and iron sharpening iron, etc. And he will be part of a larger congregation, but there's also going to be Zoldan Zephyr, who is friends with another small group of people, and those two groups may not intersect very much. You know what I mean? And this is the same thing that happens with very, very large mega churches. We have a tendency to think that some of those churches, they're only out for numbers, or people are only coming to get the charge of the big service and the big auditorium. That may be true, but I know pastors that are involved in some of those huge, very successful church congregations, and they acknowledge that their public service is only a surface type of thing. I don't mean to disparage that, but it's only a beginning. And some people are going to be attracted to that. And some people who are wanting to self-select themselves and grow in a deeper relationship with understanding and a deeper relationship with other people are going to seek out other programs that the church congregation has that are smaller in nature, because that's where those type of relationships can be grown and the bonds can be stronger and enhance one's relationship with Christ, with God. So that's a way to view this also, that you know, it's hard to speak to love to everybody that's in 1,000-person congregation, or 500, or 400, or 50. One is going to grow by their associations with smaller groups that may not be as formalized as a large congregation, but are nevertheless that they're there. And then everybody kind of, you know, you have this, well, Paul explained it like a body. You know, you've got all these links together. What's the finger got to do with the foot? Nothing, except they're part of the same body.
So good. So good. Yeah. So you're saying, just to be clear, so you have this, you know, maybe if you have these larger groups, that we will naturally kind of, like you said, kind of self-select into smaller groups just organically, maybe through corporate dictation or direction, right? Hey, look, we're going to have a Bible study group where we focus on the book of Romans, and only, of the 300 to 400 people in the congregation, only 50 show up. And so now we have a smaller, more intimate group. And then, you'll have these individual relationships, and that's okay. Maybe that the larger bodies will naturally and hopefully organically, if there is this idea of trying to keep these things as in front of their mind about love, that you'll just kind of congregate to one another. You'll find people that you jive with a little bit better than others.
I have
is that
two
correct?
examples of one good and one not so good. We have a mega church here in town that's got 1,600 or so. Now, if you're from Chicago, 1,600 may not be a mega church, but it is here. It is here in Jonesboro, and they would break up into what they call small groups. They're not Sunday schools anymore; they're small groups, and for various reasons, I needed to go and learn some stuff about contemporary music because I was the coordinator for the CEM Feast. And everything was going great until one Sunday morning in the small group, I accidentally said something that was not what the pastor believed. And the next thing I know, the Sunday school teacher called and said, "Can I come over to your house and visit with you?" And his first question was, "Why are you here? Why are you coming? What did you mean by what you said?" And I said, "Well, goodness, I'm coming here to worship God and Christ. And I didn't know that you all didn't believe that. I would certainly never have said it." And then a week later, I'm called into the pastor's office, into the principal's office, as I put it. And he grilled me about why was I here, what do I believe, and all this kind of stuff. Okay, that's one example. Second example is every Wednesday morning for about the last 6 or 7 years, I've gone to a local Bible study. Tommy Davis, who is online with us, is in it too. And I'm allowed to express my opinion. I'm allowed to say, "Hey, here's another way to look at that. Hey, here's how we look at that." And we discuss our differences instead of them making me feel very uncomfortable. I'm not welcome. Can't believe you don't believe the same things that we do, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we've gotten into holy days, Sabbath. We've gotten into heaven and hell, all kinds of stuff as a discussion topic not as a point of dissension. Hey, you're not welcome. So there's two different examples that I've had of two different ways for that to be handled. Anyway.
Yeah, but you're not allowed to bring that up at a feast site, Skip. You can't mention the fact that you fellowship with those people. Okay, you're going to cause division if you do that. I'm being facetious, Skip.
I know.
You can't.
I know, Michael. We've talked about this 1,000 times.
Well, it's a good example because I think there is a ministry there, right? There's a value there for us to not to focus on the common ground, right? That we do have, to know that we are one body. and I think Michael was the one that brought up that it was Satan who has divided us, right? That he is very clever. He has had us focus on doctrines over the community of believers, right? That was more important, our understanding on these things than coming together. That's an issue. One of the other scriptures I wanted to bring up was it blows my mind that Jesus was able to summarize the whole book into a few sentences. That all the laws, all the prophet and the laws hangs on these two, right? The love for God with all our mind and all of our heart and all of our soul. And then we have, the second one that is like it, which is to love thy neighbor as thyself. And I thought, loving God is talked about in John 14:15, that if you love me, keep my commandments, right? That's how we show God we love him. And I love the example that Skip showed me, told me a couple years back. He said, well, yeah, man, if you love your wife, you buy her flowers, right? You do these things to show people you love them. It's natural. You have these things you want to do to show God you love them. And that's expressed by, these laws that he's given us, these commandments, right? And so that's pretty simple. But the second part of that was this idea about the community. I thought, well, how do you love your neighbor? And I thought service is what came to mind to me immediately. Well, it's difficult to serve your neighbor if you're holed up in the house. You got to get out. I think someone brought up earlier, got to get out of the house and get down there. Now, you don't have to necessarily go to the church to serve your brothers. You can always see someone on the street corner or, what may have you. But you know what? It does make it a little easier if you do go to the church to find opportunities, let's say, for service. So that was one of the other cases I thought to serve the body, right? Is that it's a commandment to keep. You can easily find the little old lady who's having problems with her hot water heater and could really use, for one of the guys to show up and help her out or whatever, But there's all these great opportunities all around you if you're only listening for them at the community of believers. So anyways.
Well, we have a good thing in our culture, and I think the Americans are probably the best at this. And I've learned to appreciate it, having been married to one, that when you have a family reunion, my family was pretty separated because we originated in England, and my immediate family went to Australia. My mother's sister's family went to Canada, and my dad's brother's family stayed in England. So we didn't grow up around relatives and family. And so the idea of going to a family reunion is, to me, there's a great likeness with all of this, in that when you go, if you willingly go to a family reunion, you go because you're part of that, because you have that name attached to you, and you can easily make the spiritual and see the spiritual analogies. You have that name in common. And while you may not all live close to one another, there may be some of the relatives that you do live close to, and some that you spend a lot of time with and that you really enjoy their company. But it doesn't keep you from going to the family reunion, because you're part of that greater family. And when you go that you're not going to be on the same page politically or socially or financially or whatever with the other people who are there. but the family name overrides those differences, and you have that willingness to come together and spend time, and you derive enjoyment, and you share things during that family reunion that bond you together as a family, even though as you're driving away, you kind of go, yeah, I'm glad I don't live next door to Uncle Bob, you know, or whatever it is. But he's still your Uncle Bob, and that connects you. And I, you know, God made us that way, to where we want to have that connection with the name that connects us. And, you know, I was thinking, my brain was just kind of going off on rabbit trails, and it made me think about the social and political state that we find ourselves in this country, is that as humans, we like to be part of groups, because we don't like to feel alone in our thinking. We don't like to feel like perhaps we're the odd one out, we're the strange one, or we're the one that thinks or does weird things. So we tend to look for people who validate the things that we believe and practice and think about. And because that validates us as a human being, it also helps us know that perhaps we're not crazy, because there's a few other people out there who do the same things and that kind of thing. But taken to an extreme is what we're seeing in our culture today, where we have leftists and progressives whose ideas are so out there, and yet they are seeking validation for the idea that a man can get pregnant and a woman can be a man, and you know, all these crazy gender things, and even, you know, other societal beliefs that people are attempting to force on us. And in an effort to validate what I think they know in their hearts is not true or right, but in an effort to validate it because they're not willing to depart from that stance that they've taken, instead of trying to gather people together who are of like mind and having discussions and proving that what they believe is true, their effort to validate their way of thinking, and we can go back and kind of see a little of this in our past church history, is to silence those who don't go along with the same thing. So they want to create this impression, as we did in our past church group, that we were all united in what we believed and what we taught and what we thought. And we use the power that we had from the pulpit or whatever, the corporate group, to silence those who might believe differently, or who might shed light on the fact that we weren't as united as we wanted to look. And we're seeing exactly the same thing in our culture, is that those who don't validate the left, progressive, socialist, whatever thinking, their tool of power is to silence us, so that they appear to be unified, and they can make statements to that effect that we all believe, and that people believe, and that everyone says and scientists say. And the only reason they can get away with doing that is because they have the power to silence those who disagree. So, you know, we've come out of a history of that in our church groups. And, you know, so we need to get back to more of the family reunion style of thing, where we are connected by the name that unites us, even while recognizing that we're not necessarily all on exactly the same page, but our desire is to be part of that greater family. Sorry for the length.
Yeah, it's so great. Man, that was really good.
Yeah, Jill, that may have been the point of the day right there.
Yeah, well, it provided some nuance to kind of a pushback in some ways, I think, to what I'm talking about. I think it was really great because, so I've been looking at where the motivations came from, Jill, about why we became very individualized, right? And so, and I really traced it back to, it's only the Judeo-Christian mind could have come up with the scientific method. And there's like a list of proofs that I could give you, right? But I'm starting to think now that God knew the trajectory of all of this, that he knew the ebb and the flow of the thought process, right? This move away from the collectivist or the community, the tribal mindset, right, to the individual. And that then the individual would start to create new tribes, these kind of camps, right, that we're talking about now. And that would be, you know, that wouldn't be sustainable. And that eventually it's going to come unglued. Maybe this was all for, maybe this, he knew this was going to be the trajectory from the very beginning. I mean, of course he did, but you know, that you can see this very logical, rational explanation of why things have kind of unfolded in the way they have. And I agree with everything you said. And especially this beautiful analogy of the family reunion, being called by a name. You know, we quip that we can't choose our family, right? But we can certainly choose our church. Well, I mean, is that any different in some ways? Should it be related that any differently? Should we, you know, say for better or worse, you know, the Uncle Bobs of our congregation should be kind of listened to with that kind of grain of salt? Wonderful points. Thank you so much for that.
Well, just an extension on that is that within our small groups, most of us, you know, meet in some form like this during the week, but we look forward to going to the feast, you know, and getting that family reunion kind of atmosphere and we go knowing that there are a variety of different small groups and different beliefs within that group, but we still recognize the benefit of that family name that we all share, and we look forward to going and doing that. So yeah, I wasn't making any effort to push back at what you were saying at all, you know, because somehow we need to find this balance, and I think we're doing better at it. The fact that we do have these feast sites that welcome all kinds of different groups, and that we recognize we're not trying to make everybody believe the same thing when we come together for the feast. We are simply having a spiritual family reunion. And, you know, so it was just one of those things that came to my mind.
Sure. Well, all right. I just figured out my feast topic, guys. Back off, Skip. Back off, Mike. It's dibs. That's a beautiful analogy of yeah, the feast is kind of like a church family reunion. That's pretty cool. There's all kinds of fun ways that you can really work with that as the premise.
Why do I have to back off? We're not even in the same location.
Hey.
Blake, I was not aware that you were even speaking.
Oh yeah, right. Give me 3 sermons during the feast. Why not make it 4, Skip?
You know, one thing to be mindful of as far as our past, and this is a proclivity that we have as human beings, is you know, that where we will join ourselves with a collective to where we will literally submit ourselves to a hierarchy and, you know, a caste rule, where we have one individual that's the main dude, the head chief, the apostle, the pastor, the minister, whatever, and then we're all to be cookie cutters, is over the fact when we join ourselves to a congregation and we've come out of what we believe was error. You know, like, you know, for example, I was born and raised in the Roman Catholic tradition. And when you discover that those things that I was taught are not scripturally sound, and then you graduate to a point where you have understanding and you join yourself to a group or a congregation that helps you understand that here's the truth. And so, and one of the focuses of the group is to get everyone scared to death that we have to be afraid of those that are going to come into our community that have a different doctrine or a different thought. And we were trained to be afraid of anybody that thought differently than we did about anything. Like we had to be, like you mentioned the word homogeny. You know, we all had to be of the same exact mindset on everything, because anybody outside of that is someone that could be bringing in false doctrine, which would divide us, and we can't have that. Which then stifles the ability for us to do what I think one of the main things I gleaned out of this discussion was our ability to sharpen iron by being able to have a conversation, to to question, to disagree, and to hear different points of view, so that we can come to a full understanding of what it is that God is helping us grow in our, to grasp. And so that's just something that we should be mindful of, because that's where it kind of stemmed, as far as, eschewing the idea of sharpening iron and submitting ourselves to a single authority that's going to tell us what to think and believe, and that anyone coming in that's outside of that thought process is not of us, and they're somehow harmful to us, and that's not healthy either.
Yeah, there's this concept called social contagion, right? And I think that was the preventative, was Paul was talking about, was speaking the truth in love, that you kind of become an antibody for the body of Christ, right? That you kind of like, hey, hold on, there's this new idea that's coming into this group. And yes, it's important that we stay together on this thing. So we need to attack this idea, attack this thing for the sake of the body, right? That there's, because the social contagion, the meme will work its way through the whole body. And if left unchecked, can really cause a lot of damage, can cause dis-ease, right? Cause a division. And I think so I think we've been kind of, in some ways, focusing on the wrong reasons for the importance of community and group. And so, anyways, yeah, I think that's kind of the hopefully the check and balance. And at the same time, we don't lose the group, but at the same time, we don't become ossified into some weird kind of cultish, group where we start to, kind of lose we lose individuals, get lost in the sauce, as it were. So very cool. All right, y'all, I'm getting the dumb. My brain is obviously starting to short fire, and I'm getting the stupids. So love you all, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present. I have a little man outside who is, beckoning his buddy, as it were. We're going to play in the pool in the front yard. Yes, we're kind of rednecks. No, we don't have a pool to put in the backyard. So he's still at the age where we can get away with that. And his father will join him on the Sabbath and splashing water on him and all that. So love you guys. Have a wonderful rest of your Sabbath, and you take care.
Great,
Bye-bye.
Blake. We appreciate you coming, and this was really good, and you inspired a lot of good discussion and a couple of sermons.
I think that was Jill, but yeah. Cool. All right. Have a good rest of your day, guys. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, let's see. Michael Deering, would you, unless somebody else has something to add, we'll close out. Anybody? Okay, Michael, would you close us out?
Yeah, we can do that. Our gracious, loving Abba, Yah, Father, we come before you, so very grateful, Father in heaven, for the this opportunity to come together to really hear your word expounded on by your servant Blake, helping us to come to grips to understand the community, the body that we're part of in your Son. Thankful, Father in heaven, for this blessing that we've had to be able to sharpen iron the way we have, this format to be together, unified in the Spirit. Not just in terms of mindset, but also in terms of our ability to use technology. We're not in the same room, but we're able to communicate with one another through this technology. We're able to share our thoughts and our ideas, and they're a reflection of you and your Son as being flesh and being imperfect and not grasping the full truth and the full vision. We're thankful, Father, in having this opportunity that we've had today to be able to come to better appreciate and understand that we can grow into the grace and the unity that you have for us through your Son. And so we praise you and thank you. We ask, Father in heaven, you remember all of those we lifted up to you in prayer, and our prayer requests, those who are sick and afflicted, those who are dealing with trials, again, for John Beasley, for his recovery, those who are struggling with cancers, that are going through chemotherapy and entering into hospice, and for Skip's healing from his procedure. And we just give you thanks that we could call upon you and recognize, Father, that you're in absolute control. We praise you and thank you for this blessing that we've had today on this your Sabbath, this day of rest. We thank you for everyone that's been here with us today to share together in this the service. And we just pray you be with each and every one of us, that your countenance will continue to smile upon us as we go into another week. Help us to continue to be your servants, to be used as the instruments that you desire us to be, to influence those you desire us to influence, and to build one another up in love, as we give you thanksgiving and praise for this time that we've had today, and praise you in the name and by the authority of your salvation for all mankind, our Savior and Master, Yeshua Christ the King. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everybody. It was a great discussion. Blake, I thought Blake brought out some really good stuff. Okay, that's it. And next week, Michael is going to lead us in a general discussion. I think it'll be very interesting, as his always are. So we can continue to sharpen iron and so forth. So that's it for me. I'm kind of running out of gas too.
Thank you, Skip.
I had a rough day yesterday. Thank you all.
Special goodbye to Prasad.
Oh, yes.
Stuck there the whole time.
Right.
Yeah. Subharatri, Nakorako. Subharatri, Manchiratri. Hopefully he's able to still hear.
Yeah. And Michael, on a whole nother subject, there's a certain song that I'm going to play, either as special music, or I think we're going to have a praise night session. And I'm going to need some pictures of Prasad and his community observing the feast and regular church and so on. So if you could send me a handful of those, I would much appreciate it.
Oh, yep, got them. Yep, no problem. I'll make sure you get them.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
Goodbye, all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.